It's 11 p.m. and you're not doing anything wrong. You're just refreshing the same 3 apps for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Nothing new is there. You already know that. You do it anyway. Your thumb moves before your brain decides to move it. Down, release, wait, down again. The room is quiet. The phone is not asking you to do this. You're doing it to yourself, and you can't quite say why. Somewhere else, someone else is doing it too. A cigarette, a drink, a bet, a scroll. Different habit, same hour, same quiet hum underneath it. You felt some version of this. Maybe small, maybe not so small. You've probably been told a story about why this happens. The story goes like this. Certain chemicals hijack your brain, your willpower fails, and you become dependent. Simple, clean, mostly wrong. That story has a comforting shape. It puts the blame on the substance, not the life around it. It lets everyone else off the hook. And for a long time, it was the only story science seemed to have. Because for decades, one experiment sat in the middle of addiction science, and it didn't ask what people were addicted to. It asked something stranger. What are they missing? Picture a man. Let's call him the man in the room. Not a real person, just someone to hold on to as we go. He's got a habit he can't seem to put down. Everyone around him assumes the same thing you might assume, that the substance did this to him, that it reached into his brain and rewired him against his will. Here's where the latter starts. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Bruce Alexander noticed something odd about the addiction research of his time. Almost all of it was done on rats living alone in small metal cages, with nothing to do except press a lever for a drug. Of course, they pressed it constantly. What else was there? No other rat to smell, no will to run on, no reason to be anywhere except waiting for the next dose. Alexander had a hunch that bothered him. What if the cage was the experiment and nobody realized it? So he built something different. He called it Rat Park, a wide, open enclosure with tunnels, wheels, food, and other rats to play with, fight with, and mate with. Sunlight where there had been none. Company where there had been none. A rat could still choose the drugged water. It was right there, unlocked, no different from before. But now it had a whole life competing for its attention. The rats in Rat Park used far less of the drug than the isolated ones. Some barely touched it at all. Sit with that for a second. The chemical didn't change. The rat's brain didn't change. What changed was everything around it. That single finding quietly rewrote a question that had been asked wrong for 100 years. It's not what's in the drug. It's what's missing in the life. Now the Y ladder climbs higher. If that's true for rats, is it true for us? There's an old piece of evidence that lines up almost too well. During the Vietnam War, a huge number of American soldiers used heroin regularly. Not occasionally, regularly, in a place that was frightening, far from home, with nothing familiar to hold on to. Officials back home braced for crisis. An entire generation of veterans, addicted for life, flooding back into American cities. A researcher named Lee Robbins was asked to study exactly how bad it would get, and the numbers stunned everyone who expected the worst. The overwhelming majority simply stopped, not through treatment, not through willpower alone. They went back to families, jobs, routines, people who knew their names. The environment that made the drug feel necessary was gone. So in most cases was the need for it. Two very different settings. A cage of rats and a war zone of young men. And the same pattern showing up in both. Take away the surroundings that made a life feel unbearable, and the pull of the substance quietly loses its grip. You can see a smaller, quieter version of this in ordinary life, without any drug involved at all. People who move to a new city sometimes lean harder into old habits before they build new friendships. People who lose a job sometimes drink more in the weeks before they find the next one, and less once they do. The habit isn't fixed. The surroundings are. And when the surroundings shift, the habit often loosens its grip on its own, without anyone telling it to. The man in the room isn't so different. He didn't start his habit in a moment of empty free time. He started it somewhere specific, a stretch of loneliness, a loss he didn't talk about, a version of his life that felt unbearable to sit inside of, sober, alone, at rest. You don't have to have a diagnosable addiction to recognize the shape of this. Think about the version of you that reaches for your phone the second a conversation goes quiet, or the version that pours a second drink, not because the first didn't work, but because the silence after it did. Small versions of the same reflex. Not weakness. A reflex. What is that reaching for? This is where the science gets a name for it. Connection. A physician named Gabor Mate, who spent years working directly with people struggling with severe substance use, put it plainly. He said the question isn't why the addiction. The question is why the pain. Every case he saw carried some earlier wound. Neglect. Trauma. A childhood where safety wasn't guaranteed. The substance wasn't the disease. It was the response to one. That idea shows up again in the work of the journalist Johann Hari, who spent years interviewing people recovering from addiction across several countries. He kept hearing the same phrase in different words. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. It's connection. People who had somewhere to belong, something to be responsible for, someone who needed them, recovered at far higher rates than people who were simply told to stop and left alone with the silence. There's a piece of brain chemistry worth clearing up here, because most people get it backward. You've probably heard that dopamine is the pleasure chemical, and that a drug or a habit floods you with it, and that's the whole story. But dopamine isn't mainly about pleasure. It's about wanting. It's the signal that says, keep going, this matters, don't stop now. It's the same chemical that fires when you're falling in love, chasing a goal, or waiting for a message to come through. Which means a habit doesn't need to feel good to keep pulling you back. It just needs to feel like it matters. Like it's the one thing in an otherwise flat day that still gets a response out of you. For someone whose life feels muted everywhere else, that pull could be louder than anything a doctor's warning label could compete with. So why does the pull attach itself to a phone, a bottle, a bet, instead of something else? Because those things are fast, reliable, available at 11 p.m. when nothing and no one else is. A friend might not pick up. A feeling might not resolve on its own for hours. But the drink is always there. The scroll always loads. In a life short on things you can count on, something you can count on starts to feel like relief, even when it costs you. Here's the twist. You were taught that addiction is a hijacking, a chemical breaking in and taking your brain hostage. But it may be closer to the opposite. Addiction might be the brain doing exactly what it's built to do, looking for relief, looking for regulation, looking, in its own broken way, for connection when the real thing isn't available. That reframes everything you just heard. The rats in the small cage weren't broken by the drug. They were alone, and the drug was the only thing available that resembled comfort. The soldiers weren't cured by discipline. They were given back a life worth being present for. The man in the room isn't weak. He's solving a problem the only way he currently knows how to solve it. This doesn't mean substances are harmless, or that consequences don't matter, or that a habit can't spiral past someone's ability to control it on their own. It can. It does. That part is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously, not romanticized. None of this is a reason to look away from real harm. It's a reason to look one layer deeper than the harm itself. But it does mean the question worth asking is different than the one most of us grew up asking. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, and what were you trying to survive? Think about how differently that question lands. What's wrong with you closes a person off. It asks them to defend themselves. What happened to you opens a door. It assumes there's a reason, and that the reason makes sense, even if the response to it didn't help. There's a word for the opposite of addiction that keeps showing up across this research, and it isn't sobriety. It's connection, not the performance of being fine. Actual, felt connection. A person, a place, a purpose, something that makes the quiet hour at 11 p.m. feel less like something to escape from. Look at the man in the room one more time. Nothing about his story changes what he did or the damage it may have caused. But it changes what actually helps. Not shame, not isolation dressed up as consequence. Something closer to Rat Park. Somewhere to belong before he's asked to stop. And it changes something closer to home too. The next time someone in your life is stuck in a habit you don't understand, The instinct might be to ask them to just stop, to use more willpower, to want it badly enough. But maybe the better question is quieter than that. What is missing from their life right now that this is filling in? You probably won't remember Bruce Alexander's name by tomorrow, or Lee Robbins, or Johann Hari, or the specific studies. That's fine. What's worth keeping is smaller than that and easier to carry. The next time you notice yourself reaching for something at 11 p.m. in the quiet, without quite knowing why, don't just ask what you're reaching for. Ask what you're reaching away from. Because the real answer was never in the substance. It was an empty room around it. And a room, unlike a habit, can always be filled with something else.